I am now. I am now. I went to get a cup of tea and I thought, remember to record. Okay. Um, okay, so the point here is that build your util stuff up because you can reuse this for the rest of the term. Yeah, it does. It definitely steals my brain cells. Um, I think, Brendan, that's a good point. And when you're in a situation where you're doing live coding and you're trying to show a point and it throws errors, it's obviously a little bit of an obstacle. Okay, we'll forgive it for the time being. So my point is to you is that you build this up. After we hit week 4, I will show you how to use it in a proper object-oriented way. And show you all those other different mechanisms if you want, and we make some changes if you want to. But the point is, if now you start building this up, if you don't want to call it util, another name for it, and this was something I discussed with lots of students when we were doing Python, is you basically create your own library of useful functions. So you can do this with the same name of a function, so all your output is nice and simple. And suddenly your code will, let's just try the import statement. Why is my import statement not happy? Library, let's try that. Import library, do that. And what's it complaining about? Who can spot my error? Enable settings, auto import, I'll do that. I don't know if that's going to do anything because I don't want to write that every time, right? That's just annoying. I don't want to write HF and so on. So I want it to do it. Can't resolve method, print in lecture, create method in lecture. I have it in there. So this is IntelliJ being too clever for its own good and being a nuisance. Code library print. Okay, hang on. Let's try this. I doubt it. I doubt we need to worry about this too much. Let's try that. That's interesting. It just disappeared. What happened there? Yeah, this, I don't know what, I'll have to work out why it's temperamental about it, because I don't like using the word library.print. It kind of gives you, could be that library is a reserved word and that was a bad choice as well. That's always worth bearing in mind. Let's just call this NAD library. So now it's unique, right? There we go, NAD library. Anyway, we'll play around with it. What I'd like you to do, no, we're doing it on 3 o'clock tomorrow. Right, the point is, we want that bit to disappear. It's easy enough, fiddle around with it, play with it. But my issue with you is that build your own library of utility functions. Start doing it now, everything. So some of you coded your first worksheet in a really neat way. Some of the people that I saw, I mean, there are lots of really excellent examples, but the bit I particularly liked, and I think I pointed it out to several people, is that people wrote things like this in their library. They would do public static int, right? Add int num1, int num2, and inside it, all they did was just return num1 plus num2, right? So they had their own add function they can use anytime they need to add integers. Now, but you say, hang on, I want to add doubles. So again, using that same principle, if the parameter types are different, you can have exactly the same name. So you can change the return type and the parameters, doobie, double, there we go, right? And it will work. So if I come over here and I write print, see if it's going to let me do it, print, and what did I say? I was going to do add, and I'm going to say 2,3. It will, because I have to put this NAD library, annoying NAD library thing here, because I haven't imported it correctly, right? So I'm going to do one last change of name, just because it's annoying me enormously. I'm just going to call it NL, right? So it's just nice and brief, right? And then we'll sort that out later. I'll get someone just to point out where my error is. Right, so let's do that, and let's do that. And it's complaining. Why is it complaining? Cannot resolve method print int. So all I need to do is I go back to my library and make sure, see, it's filling it out with tons and tons of stuff, right? I've got a print, I've got a double, but I haven't got one for an integer. So the moment you build these things, right? So let's do one for an integer. So let's just call this num and turn the data type to integer and then display num. Num is probably a better term than DBL for double and so on. And that should be lowercase, right? Okay, so we're starting to see a strategy, okay? Yeah, what you can have is multiple functions with this name. You can have them with the same name as long as the parameters and types are different. So it may be that these two parameters, and it's not happy that they're both. There we go, problem sorted. It's now, that is a lot neater. Yeah, what it is that you could do that, Taylor, but don't get too complicated. Some of it will work, some of it won't. I think, Declan, you're right. There are limits to the way that you use overriding of functions. And it will probably tell me that, okay, it'll probably say something like, yeah, that one's okay, that one's not so okay. But the broad rule is if as long as the parameter types are different, you can override that function. And you will find, play with it, because it will save you a lot of coding. Although this is a very jumbled introduction, and I apologize, probably because my brain is a bit tired. So that's what I really wanted to try to encourage. Next week, things get a little bit trickier, and they get slightly more complicated. Yeah, to play with this, yeah, that's probably what the issue was. No, they are all static in there. So you'll see that this happens when I do a lecture. As soon as I come out of it, I see that I've just not written a single. Is it possible to make a single function which could return any data type? That's a bigger issue. Actually, if you think about JavaScript, right, it has one data type called a var, right? And in theory, it covers every data type. Why don't we like that? I tell you why we don't like it, well, Java doesn't, is because, how can I put it? The precision that Java expects for data types, it needs you to respect that precision. If you work with Python, it doesn't care because it will work it out. If you work with JavaScript, you can call them all vars, V-A-R, and it's happy. But here we're not happy, Java isn't. It's a very good question, Miklos, but it's a direction I wouldn't go. There are public static int and double that return int and double values. They're the same functions for string values. Yes, yeah. What I would do is I would respect its authority. Nicola, that's a good way of putting it. Okay, so because I've got a few other things I'd like to get through, what I would say to Azamat, play with this, build up your own library, give it your own initials. And then when you come to the coursework, and your coursework will be perhaps a little bit challenging. I won't even mention what it's going to have in it yet. It's week 6 that I introduce a lecture, which will give you the basic sort of code starting on it. You'll find it a lot easier because you'll think, I need to do this, I need to add, or I need this, I need to return this, etc., etc. If you've built up a really good library of functions, you can do this. Yeah, Brendan, C++, I think you can have a generic type. Don't go that route at the moment. At the moment, it's not worth doing. At the moment, it's worth playing around with this, staying with what we are, and then moving on from it. And then we will. Let's just move now on to my next. That was only my first topic, okay? So there's a little bit of code there. Won't it be similar to Python where the lecturers will not have access to that library though once you've sent it in? No. So Kerry's actually asked a really good question. For the coursework for Java, you will zip up the whole package, basically the whole folder. So you'll create a coursework project, and then you will zip that up, and it will include all your subfolders, all the utility functions, classes, and all the rest of it. It won't be a single file. With Python, you're absolutely right, it was a single file. So please take that as a cue to get on and start building yourself up a library. I had a student a few years ago who tried to create one for everyone, but I think that's probably not the best way to go because you want it to be your own version and your own code. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so next up, we've talked about plugins, so that covers that. The next are worksheets. What I've noticed is that some of you are making your life a lot more difficult, I would say. Now, this is a partially subjective point of view. So don't feel obliged to follow this. But what I'm trying to get at here is that you could create a packages ready Java language for a folder, right? So if I created a folder in here called Worksheets, and inside here, every time I had a new worksheet, I would just call it worksheet. I know some of you are already doing this, okay? Boolean, Phil Helms, true and false values, they often will appear. And I think I use a Boolean in the coursework, I can't remember. So we say we take worksheet 1, right? Worksheet 1. It appears in that same folder. What we have inside worksheet 1 is a public static void main. Let's go and grab it. There we go. And then we do that, and we do that, right? And then we need its, these are default parameters. If you've got tab 9, it will just fill it in for you, right? So now I can do this. And this is what I was trying to recommend to quite a lot of you. So each of the questions on a worksheet can basically sit inside. And when you need to run them, you run them from inside here. Lots of you did this. And it's not that it's my preferred way of doing it. The advantage to you is that if you're going back through your code and each of the questions is a separate file, it will take you so much longer. So all it is a recommendation. You won't get marked down, but I'm trying to say, don't go through the process of creating complications and complexity where you don't need to. So that was a recommendation from an observation in this week about worksheets and to help you. Remember, these code worksheets on your hard disk are just folders. So your code, this worksheet 1 Java file, will be sitting under a folder called worksheets, under another folder called code, and another folder called src, and so on. Okay, so it's not a bad idea to get lots of folders. So as we work through the course material, it's all nicely organized. Yeah, I'm not sure what way around you mean that. But for example, when I was looking at someone's work today, I saw them saying, oh, worksheet 1, had to close the project down, grab another project, open it from scratch. But if you just have one project for all of your worksheets, it would just save you time. That's all I'm trying to suggest. Okay, so you make a judgment about what makes sense to you, and we're not looking at an opportunity to mark people down over it or anything like that, just to make your life a bit easier. Okay, so that's that, and I've just got another cup of tea. Fantastic, thanks. Right, let's talk about next week. Very, very briefly. Yeah, Charlotte, can you take a screenshot of it? And maybe we can share it. I can share it as a good example if you're happy to. The more people see of good examples and really nice ideas, I am really happy to share that stuff amongst students, and you know, the kind of stuff that you do. What I'd like to do very briefly, I don't want to waffle because yeah, so Ala, you've asked the key question. If you have the library in one project, can you use it in other projects? It's much more complicated, but in theory, yes. This is the other reason that if you create a library in one project and all your worksheets in different folders in that, yeah, copy and paste, then it's a lot simpler. So even if you haven't done it now, I'd encourage you to do it. Yeah, exactly. Declan's right. You could just copy it in. Hang on, can I click on that and drag that over and have a look? There we go, grab it over, give me a moment. Over here, come over here, screen. There we go. There we go. Right. Oh, I see. So what you've done is, are these folders within a single project, Charlotte, or do you have them as separate files with separate folders within the same project? That's what I'm encouraging. So you just wanted to know if it's necessary, but okay. I'll leave that. Those separate projects, the need contains, okay, so this is where I think we have a certain element of subjectivity and what you're comfortable with. My recommendation is, if I was a student here, I know how, because I know how difficult things will get, I would just have this one project. It would be called whatever, Java term 2, and all my worksheets would be sitting in folders. My utility would all be in the same thing. From a point of view, and you did raise a question about overheads, there would be no significant overhead having all those files in a single project, because if you're not actually using them or creating them, it should generally be okay. But it's up to you. Okay, how would you change the name of, right click the name of your project, and you can refactor it. But what you'll notice is that the folder it's sitting in won't change. So to answer Kobe's question, how would you change the name of the project? You can right click it. So mine's called Untitled, really original name. I just rename it and I call it, let's just say Java work, Java, right? My dog is outside barking at me, right? But what you'll notice is that the folder, if you can see that in the top right left-hand corner, it's still called Untitled, which means that what you should really do then is close your folder, go back to your hard disk and rename the folder it's sitting in. Doc is telling Java, yeah, it's saying, Nad, your advice is useless. Don't listen to him. She's probably saying that, right? Okay, right. So that's just some kind of advice, recommendations to help you do it. Is there a quick way to fuse these projects together? That's a brilliant question, Charlotte. Okay, you've got some people on this. Anyone else who's read Charlotte's question in the chat, help her do that. Because if you can find me a neat trick to fuse a bunch of projects together, then I can share it in one of these lectures, okay? And that would be a really useful thing to do. Typing. Right, let's talk very briefly about next week. Thank you very much for that, Charlotte. Let's talk about next week and what's going on next week. So next week, just so we're explicitly clear, we are going to grade or mark 2G, which is the worksheet. And this one has no arrays, okay? This is just all if statements and loops, okay, for that one. But it's also the week, according to the schedule, where you're going to work through the array material. Now, several questions came up this week. It is a feature, fantastic. Okay, merging projects, brilliant. I need to grab that link. Maybe you can email that to me so I can share it with everyone if they're in a similar situation. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just spend 5 minutes talking through a couple of strategies. We have some very confident Java programmers here, but I want to recognize that there are lots of people here who are so new to this that they might get slightly overwhelmed. So next week is one of those weeks that might do it to you. So here is my strategy. Several students have asked me this week, would I recommend a textbook? How would I do it? Is there a good textbook out there and so on? There are some excellent textbooks out there, but I'm not recommending a textbook for this reason. I've deliberately designed this material to work in this way, right? I spend a lot of my time trying to think about this and I don't always get it right, but this is my idea. With arrays, it feeds in the concept of data types and it feeds in the concept of variables. And it kind of extends those two concepts in a logical way. And so what I've done in the way that I've introduced it and how I introduced this concept is to try to scale it from simple building up into, yeah, the good references are great, into more complexity. The reason I'm saying that is that for those who are new, these videos aren't, I wouldn't call them optional. What I would recommend you do is maybe have the worksheet open, but the videos are demonstration videos. This first one, introduction, is quite an explanation of how arrays work, what they mean, the rest of it. Good point, Robert. Thank you very much. I will make that point, actually. Robert has a very, very good point, which actually is a line in the coursework. So thank you for reminding me, and I'll mention that in a sec. We are dealing with arrays. Just to be absolutely clear, we are not dealing with, let me just make this clear and write this. Hopefully you can see this writing. We are dealing with an array. An array is both a concept and a data structure. We are not dealing with array lists. And if I hear some of you groan, I sympathize, right? We're not doing array lists. If you see them, you'll get marked down in your coursework for using them. But here's the thing, right? Here's the thing about it. That's actually really easy to use. It's so stupidly easy to use. Your question to me, but why are you making us learn that, which is trickier? You have to index it, you have to do this, that, and the other. Because, because we are trying to build your grasp of these concepts from the ground upwards. We want you to be confident with these concepts. In the very first year I taught with array lists. And what I noticed is it didn't actually enhance people's understanding when we came to the second year. But by sticking to an array, people were much sharper in learning about indexes, issues to do with data, issues to do with all kinds of related things to do with an array. And so it became a more useful, yeah, it became a more useful and important way of approaching it. Okay, so that's introductory waffle and justification over with. If you want a good textbook, I think the one that I've always seen that, I think this is its name, I recommended it, is that one. I think there are electronic copies in the library. It's very entertainingly written, but the issue I have with the textbook is that it goes in different direction to the way that I approach the material. And although I try to use it in my second year module, it jumped, for me, it did everything upside down because it was relying on a solitary student working through the material without any other contact. But if you have a parallel course like this, the two things will pull apart and they might potentially get really jumbled. Do we stick with Java during the second year? Lucas, what course are you doing? Okay, second year, I teach a module where I give you an opportunity to build Android Studio app. And so, or you can do it as a web front app, but the backend will be in Java. So yes, it is there. I've just marked all of the, and because I want people to be creative, it's easy grading. So they get really good grades to build and be creative. And I think they really enjoyed it. If I could get Matthew, who's a second year student who really threw himself into it, built a really great game, and hopefully he'll chuck it onto the Google. Okay, yeah. Right, so let me just give you a strategy. So this bit is aimed at those who are new to it and maybe a little bit nervous. What I've done is the sequence of which this arrays introduction, it's just a broad, this is the concept, this is how it works, right? So watch that, make notes, get an idea. There's no coding in that one. The first one, 3B, using arrays created from a collection of values, is the most basic way you can create an array. It'll resemble stuff you've seen before, but it's also, I also go through a demonstration of how to use it, how to iterate through it with a loop and so on. Then it gets more complicated. 3C, you can dynamically create arrays by asking for the size and then populating each element. Okay, so this bit, 3C, follows after 3B. Be sure that you're confident with how to work with 3B before you go into the 3C stuff. Then we get into nested loops and if statements. And this is where we start taking the concepts and combining them in interesting ways. So what I would recommend is to work your way through it systematically, and each concept should lead you to the next one. The videos after the very first one are practical, so you can copy the code, watch it, test it yourself, and make sure you're happy with it. Now, I initially, when I released this, made all of these worksheets visible to everyone. So if you've been working on them, that's fantastic for you. Listening to how people are experiencing this and listening to the potential risk of tackling arrays, I asked myself a question: how can we make it so the group work supports your doing the worksheets? So this is what I've done. So you might, for those of you who've been looking at this, you might notice there's a change. For next week's group work, I've taken 2 off the sheets and made them something you would do in your groups, right? So you can share with each other and you can think through how to solve them. Now, here's the interesting thing. These were all tests last year. They're all slight variations on each other, which means for the Monday students, you would do that worksheet, and that's the one that you would show. For Tuesday, for Wednesday, you each have each group, but the advantage to you by me making 2 of them visible and you doing it as a group activity in your practicals, it means that you're doing a variation on the worksheet I want to grade you on. And I'm hoping that in that way, when you look at that worksheet, say you're on the Monday session, you think, oh my goodness, we've got to do this one. I have no idea what it means. I'll click on it, you'll see, right? Yeah, I think all of this stuff should have. Ethan, you're excellent. You're 3 steps ahead. So Ethan, in your group, work with the other people and, help them out. So look, that is essentially was a test last year. It's not a test this year. That's for the Monday group. They got to do it. Even if you look at the way the individual sentences are written, it's basically a variation on the very first one and the second one. So the idea is you can do, Gabriel, I'll come back to that question in a second. So the idea here is that by doing it as a shared activity, And if you've got Ethan in your group, then, you know, that's going to help enormously. But Ethan's responsibility is, Ethan, if I were to give you one, is to talk through how you coded it, because that's really what you want to do. And Zachary as well. I think you might have done yours. Is that what you're saying? So by you and your group breakouts working on these shared ones, you basically lay out how the code should look. With the advantage of it is that when you come to doing your own, you'll just see it's a variation on what you've done together. Now, I've deliberately done that because I think it would be too stressful if I just gave you these worksheets and you just had that, and then you were left on your own to work your way through this. This should help. The breakout group worksheets, which essentially vary what you have to do in your own groups, should give each of you a chance to get a flavor of how the thing fits together, and you collectively work the way through them. So some of you, I'm pretty sure other than Ethan, have worked their way through most of these, but don't just hand code to people. However helpful and kind you think you are, in the long term, it is actually not so useful to them. Okay, so next week's breakout room worksheets, so what you're doing in your collective groups, are already visible to you, as are your own worksheets. Next week is for you to work through these worksheets. These ones here, practical session worksheets, are the ones you're graded on. Each day session, so the Monday lot have that one, the Tuesday that, Wednesday that, Thursday that. I know I'm spelling it out, but I just want to make sure that you're clear. That's what you're graded on. These two here are basically variations on exactly the same thing you're graded on. And I really want you to attempt it this week, to really get to grips with these problems in this test, because the week after, when we come to introduction to objects, it will be a lot easier to make that transition. So after this week, folks, percent, I'm not sure what your question means. Yeah, if you use Code with me, if you split the task up, you'll find, you know, the more, and for those of you who are enjoying working with people that you've asked to be with, you know, that's a positive outcome here, and hopefully regularly seeing the same people, that will work. Percentage towards the module. The worksheets, I think the worksheets are 10%. Someone will remember. Matthew said it right at the beginning. Can anyone remember? Yeah, it's about 10%. That's why the point here is not to make it impossible. You see, the idea in my mind is this: by you and your group doing that, you've basically got a template to do your own one. And so you might just rename a few variables, alter a little bit of code, change a bit of a loop. And if you're able to do that, then you are really coming to terms with the code. You're really getting your head around it, okay? So that's why it doesn't have to be written from scratch, and you can use the breakout material that you're working on to help you do it. Okay, so that's my strategy and aim to help next week, which is a slightly tougher week. Yes, it is. So just to reiterate, next week's breakout is this stuff here, all to do with arrays. So we're in week 3 next week. That's what you're working on next week. And the week after that, we'll go through it and give you your grading. So next week's grading is worksheet 2G. And I just want to apologize, but I also want to thank Robert. I don't want to embarrass him either. Robert pointed something out to me, and I realized I'd left a task and a problem in here, which really is not suitable for this setting. It was suitable last year, but it doesn't work this year. So I've taken it out. And I know there are a couple of funny stories. And a couple of funny stories are Shah was working on, sorry, I don't mean to embarrass you, Robert. The funny story was Shah was working with a student on the second task, and it disappeared while they were working on it. So I apologize to any of you who were doing it. That's entirely me, you know, not thinking through clearly that that was a little bit not appropriate here. You were midway through it. Okay. Yeah, I do apologize. Yeah. And Declan, yeah, because Robert pointed out I'd left a sort in there, and actually however hard I tried, I thought, nah, it's just stupid. It's just stupid. What question was it? It was a sort. It was me in the face-to-face setting. Things work slightly different. And last year, this wasn't tested. You know, you were doing the worksheets, but you weren't necessarily graded on them. So it kind of gave me more flexibility to get people to play with code. And when they came to the lecture, we all coded it together and worked our way through it and stuff like that. Okay, so that's pretty much everything on my list. And I thought I would just pause. Was it fun for 5 values? Yes. Yeah, excellent. So if you do spot that, I don't know what's like in other modules, we're all suddenly stumbling into noticing things that don't work in this setting and did it face to face and so on. Okay, so let me just go back to this. Now, I want to just pause a second and give people a chance to ask any questions. Are you reasonably happy about where you are, what's going on? Next week is the last week before we really hit objects, and you'll start to build your own objects. To help you with the object, you keep, Lucas, you keep mistyping my name. You write my name, Nadmin. It sounds like I'm a kind of worker in a back office. In the course, are we allowed to use additional libraries that we haven't learned, like the arrays, utilities? No, I don't want you to do that. I want you, any library. Yeah, actually, Javid, that is the correct name. Nadmin is very funny. I was involved in writing a course with Sussex University, and one of the administrators kept on mistyping my name and called me Nadmin on the thing. And I couldn't stop laughing. I thought it was just so cheeky. So please, that's not a problem. No, please don't apologize. I'm much more robust with that. I think it's quite funny. So have we had another question along the way? Just found a plugin called 9 Progress Bar, and it is the best. Oh, I'll get you to, yeah, might have a look at that. Okay, so some, if you've sent me a private message, it's very difficult to respond in this setting. Granville, let me ask you to answer your question. Can I answer it in front of everyone? Yeah, okay, so Granville has asked, how do you move the files on the left to another folder without affecting the code? Like this. Right, let's just create a folder. And remember, the word package is nothing more in many ways than just its word for a folder. Right, let's just call this folder 2, right? There we go, there's my folder, and I want to move that file into there. I think that's what you're asking me. If it isn't, all you do is you hold your mouse down, drag it in, it pops this window up, and you just say refactor. You click the refactor button, and all your code will still work. It will know which folder that particular file is sitting, especially if it's linked up to other stuff. Right, hang on, we've got another question. What do we have to do for week 2? Is it just the single question 2G? That's all you had to do. Yeah, and remember the other thing, Daniel. My aim in the worksheets, like the learning catalytics, is not to make it so painful for you. That's why I changed what I was doing with worksheet 3 to give group chance to work through basically a variation on the worksheet, to give you a chance to think with other people how to solve it. And so would you keep, and so, you know, hopefully that will be helpful. Evan asks, would you keep a separate package with the class for your library, or does the library have to be? That's entirely up to you. I have a project that I did for my second year. I built over the summer all the code, and I just organized it into neat folders. So it's a bit like the way that Charlotte did it. She organized really nice folders. All I would say is that if those folders were internal to a project, everything would be fine. It would probably be easier to navigate around them. Okay, so any other questions, folks? And tomorrow, as I say, is Catalytics Bingo. Again, relatively, I hope, straightforward questions based on this week's material. So it's loops, if statements, and such like. Hopefully you've done enough this week to be comfortable, but you know the way that we do it, right? Other than not sharing your answers in the public chat. Last year we did it in the lecture theatre, and people chatted to their neighbours and, you know, chatted it through. It is not there again to be punishing and kind of, it's there to help you through, get some easy grades. So it takes a little bit of the stress away. And if it's fun, that would be great. If I could hand over the mic to Jack, that would be even better, because I think he would do it much better from the sounds of it. Bingo, calling out the questions, that'd be hilarious. So any other questions? If not, we can, I'm going to have a look at the 9 progress bar. Okay, Kobe, while you're doing that. Oh, case and switch. So Gabriel's asked a question of case and switch. Okay, there is a mechanism. I'll just write it here. So for those who might not know this, if you have this type of setup where you have an if statement, then you have an else if statement, and then you do something, and then you have another else if statement, and so on, it can actually look very messy. This is called a multiple if statement. There is another mechanism it's called a switch statement. So let me just see if I can illustrate it. If I have an integer, okay, I'm just going to set it to 9. And if I have an if statement which says if I is greater than 6, then do this code here, right? If I is greater than, now observe something here, really an interesting observation. I'll just show you one simple example to see if I can answer your question. Look at that here. Right, look at the way that this works. I ask that question first. If that's true, I only do the code in here and I ignore the rest. Now, if that's not true, then that basically eliminates any number above 6. So when I ask the question if I is greater than 5, because it comes second in the list, it actually doesn't mean I is greater than 5. It means greater than 5 or less than or equal to 6. Okay, so that's just one quick observation. Now, what Gabriel has asked, I think this is what you've asked, is that's a really complex, messy looking thing. So is there another way of doing it? And there is. It's called a switch statement. It lets you deal with multiple cases. So I'm going to write it out. Nice thing about tab 9 is it tenses what I'm going to do, right? So you do switch. You set up a basic switch. And the switch is like saying, let's have multiple IntelliJ recommendation to do it, and it does it for you alt enter on the if. Fantastic, even better. I just talked the concept through, Declan, but pay attention to what Declan said if you get what I'm saying here. A switch statement basically says, the logic of it is we're checking that value. And if that value is the same as greater than 6, for example, then I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to break it. And I've written it all really badly because I'm getting two languages confused. I'm going to do it Declan's way. Right, so I do if. Where's the recommendation? Where does it appear when I write if? Does it appear here? Where did you say it appeared? Oh, you press alt enter. So have I written too much? I've written if, right? And I'm on a Mac. So Mac isn't quite alt enter. No, I've got a Mac, so Mac is a pain. Yeah, I thought so. I thought so. And syntactically, basically, Gabriel, because the syntax will take me a little bit longer. Basically, you write switch, you put your value in there, you open one of these brackets, and in here, instead of if, else, else, if, you have this word case. You put the conditions for each of the cases, and underneath, you write what you would do. And it basically mirrors an if else, but it's much neater. And if you want neat code and we're checking multiple conditions, it's a good way of doing it as well. Have I actually got some lecture notes on it? I can't remember. But if I don't, I will, Declan, do it and screenshot it, and then I'll pop it onto the screen. Miklos, yes. So there is a difference between them. I haven't even thought about someone would ask me that question. I generally, if statements have, how can I put it? Switch statements are more popular when you have single value options, right? So for example, if I'm checking I, you often see switches used like this. So for case, if it equals 0, for case, if it equals 1, and so on. And it's really neat that it does it, right? When you have greater than, smaller than, and all those kind of options, people tend to go for if and else if, for the reason that I said here, that it's much easier to work out your logic of your code because of the symmetry of it. I would encourage you to use both. Is that it? Fantastic. Let me just click that. Can I open that up? Here we go. Thank you very much. Zoom in a bit. Zoom in, not zoom out. Oh, fantastic. Replace if with switch. Yes, play with it. To answer your question, Miklos, what you really ought to do is be confident with both. Broadly get used to using if and else if, because that's translatable across C++, C#, JavaScript, so much more common, that structure. Switch statements change a little bit depending on the language, but the similar concept does exist in other platforms and other languages. Can anyone remember if there's anything like that in Python? Isn't the problem with switch in the case that the if, statement has the option to put the end else clause. No, with this, you can also do this. You have something called a default clause right at the end of a switch statement, which basically is like an else statement. No, there aren't if switch statements in Python. You forgot what it's called in Python, but you think there are. Okay, so honestly, I can't remember from Python. Python feels like a million years away. But here, what I would do if I was learning this and I'd listen to what I just said, I would do my code in the one I'm comfortable with, and then write it in the alternative and look at the value of being able to do both. There is some form in Python, but it's practically used for, yeah. So my point to you is, for Miklos's excellent question, this structure is more common across different languages. I would encourage you to be confident with that. This is a nice way for some languages that have this sort of switch type concept, and it has advantages because it's neater on the page for you to use. From the point of view of us grading you, we will treat them as alternate forms of doing the same thing. As long as the logic is sound, we won't worry about it at all. We're happy with both. Okay, we are coming close to the end. I'm trying to think, is there anything else I wanted to cover? It's been a very interesting week for me watching your practicals. And can I ask just one last, got very comfortable with Python after making Discord bots and stuff. Now Java is yucky, but fine, fair enough. That's true. Brendan's right. Yes, I think that's true about switches. They are often faster because it's the way that the code is compiled and how it executes. But those differences are very minor at this stage. When you get into much more complex super object levels, you would. What is this that you have just shared? Java distill decisions. Oh yes, I actually gave you a link, didn't I? So my brain is really on holiday. Yeah, I pinched this stuff from a American university course. So there's a bunch of if statements, there's the switch syntax. So yes, thank you very much, Danny, for reminding me. I'd actually supplied that somewhere. Yeah, so this has, it was a kind of a simple resource just as a reminder. There is a link to it in several worksheets, so feel free to do it. Looking at Python switches as shown dictionaries, yeah, no, it just gets too complicated. Thank you for that. Yeah, so what was I saying? It was very interesting watching you work together. And Peter Boyd said, for those of you who have him in your practicals, it got to that really good point where when you came and spoke to a group, they didn't want you there because they were happy getting on with their own stuff and you were just a nuisance. He said he actually likes that experience. Right, someone asked earlier, but I missed the answer. Would you keep a separate package with the class for your library, or does the library have to be in the same? No. Okay, so Ala, if you look over here, you can create there's my library. It's sitting right in my code folder, but I could easily create a package. Let's think of it also as a folder on my hard disk called library classes, right? Or library files, right? And then if I want to pop it in there, I just drag it. And then when I drag it, it refactors. It means that every bit of code that's linked to that file through refactoring will still keep its link. So the idea is that treat these folders as hard disk folders. I want to see if I can show it to you on my hard disk without getting completely lost with stuff. So what is this thing called? It's called Untitled. Hang on a second, see if I can just show it to you. Untitled, my file source. Yeah, I kind of messed up my filing setup, so it's a little bit jumbled. My files hasn't updated it. Sorry, what are you asking? How do we link to the separate package with the library? You see that you either import it. Yes, so Joseph, all variations for that. Because you've lost the second question, hopefully they won't be too complicated. It will just do that one up task, so there's not a second one. Sorry, how would you do it? You create import statements inside it. Hang on, are you going to upload this recording on Moodle? No, Javed, what I'm doing with the live lectures is avoiding jamming Moodle with stuff. I'm putting it on the YouTube channel under a playlist called Live Lectures. I do that because I had a student last year who really struggled with Java. And then when he came to his coursework, he sat down and went through all the lectures and did everything in the lectures from beginning to end. And he said it would be so useful now if you just put them all together rather than I had to go through every week in Moodle. And a couple of other students have said that about the Python in the first term. I think Jasmine might have actually pointed that out as well. So I've tried to keep, I've tried to keep the stuff on Moodle fairly stripped down and to the point, and trying not to burden it with too much extra, whereas the YouTube channel will have playlists of stuff in there, just so you're not always relying on Moodle to give you all that access to all that material. And I find that the way that playlist works on YouTube so much easier, and I suspect you do as well, and it's more useful to you. If you haven't, here, I'm going to do a really cheap plug. Again, let me change that account. And just, if you haven't got access to my, let's go to the channel. Here we go. Cheap plug. It's a very good strategy. There we go. Be quiet, Nad. Okay, so as you can see, the live lectures across the top, it means that they follow a sequence. They're different from the content I'm giving you in the week. This is actually like a textbook, it's like a video textbook. That's the way I treat the stuff I'm putting on there. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. I will then say to Nick, look, I'm getting people doing it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. This is like the textbook, if you like. And the advantage of having them, as someone pointed out, all in a playlist is you can watch the first one, code it, jump to the second one and move through it rapidly. You want a shed tour, do you? Okay, maybe next time, Adam, because you'll see my music stuff as well. Okay. Yeah, but this stuff is not, because they're longer lectures, you don't necessarily want to sit through all of them. And by having them separated in that way, it's up to you whether you do want to go through them or you might flick through them. These are much shorter. This is like my textbook, my video textbook. So, feel free to add, subscribe to it so you get access. Every latest live lecture, I will pop at the top. So it's easy for you to see. Okay, so I think, yeah, I think that's pretty much it, folks. Some very, very interesting questions. And tomorrow, as I say, I'll get Catalytics ready for our, yeah, honestly, that's very kind of you to say so, Evan, but honestly, I'm, if you turned it into something commercial and you wanted to turn it into a product, hey, I'll tell you something, Evan. If you're a lecturer, everything you produce is copyrighted by the university. But if you're a student and you build something, you own it. So even if the university helps you build it, supplies you with code, you own it. So any money you earn, it's yours. So if you wanted to create your own kind of online Java course stuff and you wanted to nick all my videos to do it, you could earn money from it, but I wouldn't. Yeah. And shared butler service. That is funny. Okay. Oh, Lambda expressions. No, I won't be touching them actually. This, remember, it's only introductory, Gabriel. As we say. Okay then, folks. So what you're saying is that I should remove my Google Doc notes offline and charge people for them. No, absolutely not. I mean, from your point of view, remember, anything you get uploaded to say the Play Store, right? Let's just say that you build something and you think, I really like it. You put it on the Play Store. Yeah, I understand that, Robert, from what you're saying. And then two of your friends downloaded it and you added it to your CV. You legitimately can claim you've built something that other people are using. Massively improves your employability. Okay, so folks, let's stop. We've hit the 5 o'clock mark. Have a good rest of the evening and look forward to seeing you all for Catalytic Bingo. And I might grab Jack to do that. Okay, I'll stop the recording and I'll post the recording.